Well, hey, friends, welcome to Q on Q this week. We are glad you are with us. Well, if you are first listening to this when it first airs, happy Valentine's Day a few days late to those who celebrate. I read a lot of mixed things over Valentine's Day. Some people say it's a Hallmark holiday or it's too overly commercial. And then I read reports of people spending hundreds and thousands of dollars for Valentine's experiences. And then there's still others who celebrate the day single with friends, or maybe you have your galentines, or maybe you're out with your significant other as a couple. It's a day we often reflect on the idea of love and the heart, no matter what you might think of it. Well, we're going to take a look at the subject of the heart today. But first, I want to do a quick recap of what we have been talking about in this series. Over the past few episodes, we have been circling the idea of renewal, not as a dramatic restart, but as a quiet return to what matters most. We started by simply naming the need for renewal, acknowledging that life has a way of draining us little by little sometimes. Then we moved into renewing the mind, paying attention to the thoughts we default to, the narratives we have inside, and how clarity begins with awareness. And then, most recently, in our last episode, we talked about renewed purpose, rediscovering the why beneath the work, and learning how our calling can be reclaimed without pressure or burnout. Each episode has taken us deeper, kind of like peeling back layers that often go unquestioned. What's interesting is that even when our thinking improves and our direction feels clearer, something can still feel off. Sometimes we don't know exactly what that is. You can have a renewed mindset and a recentered sense of purpose, and yet carry a quiet kind of heaviness that doesn't quite lift. That's often because renewal isn't complete until it reaches the heart. The heart is where our desires live. It's where our wounds tend to linger, and it's where fatigue tends to hide the longest. So today, we turn our attention there. There's a kind of tiredness that doesn't show up on the surface. It's not physical. It's not always something that comes with obvious discouragement. It's the tiredness of the heart. It's a subtle tiredness that kind of builds over time, especially in people who care deeply and carry a lot. This kind of fatigue doesn't announce itself boldly. It kind of settles in quietly. It adjusts our expectations, it dulls our joy, and it sometimes even convinces us that what we're feeling is just how things are. Often, the heart grows tired not because something went wrong, but because something went on too long without being tended to. Long seasons of responsibility, those extended periods of giving without receiving, constantly feeling like we have to be the ones who are strong, dependable, and even available, even when your inner world is asking for rest. Over time, the heart learns to keep moving forward while slowly disengaging from what once felt meaningful. What makes heart weariness tricky is that it can still coexist with faithfulness. You can still show up, you can still do good work, you can still care, at least on the outside, but internally things feel muted. Our gratitude feels thinner, compassion feels heavier, and moments that once brought us joy now feel more like obligations than gifts. Sometimes the heart grows tired because it has been holding things it was never meant to carry alone. Unresolved grief or unspoken disappointment, quiet resentment, might even be hopes that were deferred and never fully grieved. Instead of being processed, these things get tucked away, layered beneath our routines. The heart doesn't forget them, it just learns how to carry them silently. There's also a spiritual dimension to this tiredness. Though it's not always easy to name, it can feel like distance or dullness or a lack of emotional connection, not necessarily to others, but even within yourself. Not a loss of belief, but a loss of tenderness. The heart still believes, but now it's guarded, kind of like a fence put around it, like we're being careful, a little less open than it once was. Recognizing a tired heart isn't about being critical of yourself. It's about honesty. Renewal doesn't begin with effort, it begins with attention. And before the heart can be renewed, it has to be acknowledged, not judged, not rushed, just seen. Because when the heart grows tired, it isn't asking for more discipline, it's asking to be restored. Depending on the translation you use, the word heart appears in the scriptures anywhere from 500 or 600 to 1,000 or more times. Because when the Bible talks about the heart, it's not referring only to emotion or mood. It's pointing to something deeper and more central, the place where desire, will, affection, and direction all come together. In Scripture, the heart is the internal compass of a person, where decisions are shaped long before actions appear. That's why Jesus says, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. He's not talking about sentiment, he's describing alignment. What we invest in, what we protect, and what we prioritize doesn't just reflect what we feel, it reveals what is quietly steering us. The heart leans toward what it values the most, often without asking for permission. The book of Proverbs puts it probably as plainly as can be when it says, above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. That verse doesn't suggest that the heart is fragile in a sentimental way, it suggests that it's influential. The heart sets direction, it shapes tone. The heart determines whether our actions feel life giving or heavy over time. I think this reframes the idea of following your heart. Biblically, the heart isn't something to obey without discernment. It's something that needs care and formation and guidance. If we leave it unattended, it doesn't drift toward clarity. It drifts toward whatever has been the loudest, or the most familiar, or the most demanding. And sometimes that causes us to put up walls. Renewal of the heart isn't about emotional intensity, and it's really not about spiritual hype either. It's about recentering what we love, what we long for, what we're allowing to influence us most deeply. It's about asking whether our inner compass still points toward what truly matters, or whether it's been slowly redirected without us noticing. I think when the heart is formed well, emotions begin to make sense. You might understand what that means. It's when desire regains some sense of clarity, or direction feels less forced. Have you ever felt that way? Renewal stops being something we chase, it becomes something that starts quietly shaping us from the inside out. And once we understand that the heart sets direction, it becomes easier to name something most of us experience but rarely talk about. And that is drift. Not rebellion, not failure, drift. It's what happens when the heart keeps moving, but nobody checks where it's going. And the most important thing to say right away is this: drift is common. It's rarely intentional, but it is common. Hearts don't harden overnight. They don't suddenly turn cold or selfish. They slowly lean, little by little. Your attention shifts, your priorities rearrange, and what once felt centered begins to feel off. Not wrong enough to stop, but not right enough to feel alive. Drift is subtle, which is why it's so easy to miss. Sometimes it shows up as loving good outcomes more than obedience. That pat on the back, good feeling? Not saying that's a bad thing, but sometimes we go for the attaboys more than we know what's right. The results still look right, but the motivation underneath has changed. We care deeply about how things turn out, but less about who we're becoming in the process. I want to say that again. We care deeply about how things turn out, but less about who we're becoming in the process. The heart hasn't turned away from good, It's just started defining good differently. And then other times, drift looks like caring more about approval than faithfulness. The work continues, the effort remains, but the internal question shifts from, is this aligned with what I'm supposed to be doing, to, is this being noticed by people? And without realizing it, affirmation begins to carry more weight than conviction, and the heart grows quieter about what it actually needs. And sometimes, yet, drift is simply serving from habit instead of compassion. The routines stay intact, your responsibilities are met, but the affection that once fueled the work has thinned out. What was once chosen freely begins to feel automatic and eventually weighs us down. And this is where burnout often begins. I'm not talking about a physical burnout, I'm talking about a burnout of our heart. It's not from a lack of effort, but from an exhaustion of affection. We keep giving and giving, but the heart no longer feels connected to why. And when affection runs dry, even good work starts to feel unsustainable. Here's the gentle truth of all of this: a tired heart doesn't mean a bad heart, it means an unrenewed one. Drift isn't a diagnosis, it's an invitation, a signal that the heart needs attention, not condemnation. And renewal begins not by quitting everything, but by noticing what the heart has been carrying alone. Now, I think we need to pause here for a moment, because before we talk about how the heart is renewed, it helps to clear away a few misunderstandings. Renewal of the heart is not emotional hype. It isn't a surge of inspiration, a dramatic breakthrough moment, or some return to a constant passion. Those experiences can be meaningful, but they aren't the measure of renewal. If we expect the heart to feel intense all the time, we'll mistake steadiness for stagnation. Renewal is not pretending everything feels joyful when it doesn't. You've been starting to feel a certain way, and you have one experience that seems to let all of those negative things go away, when you deep down know that that's not the case. The heart doesn't heal through denial, it heals through honesty. Renewal begins when we stop managing our image and start acknowledging what's actually happening beneath the surface. It's not forcing your feelings to catch up with your beliefs either. You can know what's true and still struggle to feel it. You can trust God and still feel weary. Renewal of the heart isn't achieved by scolding yourself into better emotions. It doesn't respond well to pressure. It responds to patience. And renewal isn't abandoning responsibility in order to feel alive again. Sometimes when the heart feels dull, the temptation is just to assume something drastic needs to change. We got to quit our job and go a new direction, or maybe we need to move and go to a new environment, or, drop a bunch of things and take on a new commitment. But often, the issue isn't where you are, it's what's been quietly accumulating inside you. Running from responsibility may create adrenaline, but it rarely creates alignment. You see, at its core, renewal of the heart is much quieter than we imagine. It's not emotional fireworks, it's realignment, the slow returning of affection to what truly matters. Maybe simpler said, it's learning to care deeply again without carrying everything. It's allowing desire, devotion, direction to settle back into their proper place. And when that happens, the heart doesn't necessarily feel louder, but it does feel clearer. So, how exactly can a heart become renewed? Well, that is a very large question that you could go 1,000 different directions with answers, but I think it starts when a heart sets a direction, because then renewal begins by paying attention to what has been shaping it. Hearts are formed slowly, not just by what we believe, but what we repeatedly attend to. What holds our focus day after day starts to hold our affection. And over time, attention becomes attachment, and attachment becomes direction. That's why renewal of the heart doesn't start with intensity. It starts with awareness, and what currently captures your strongest emotional energy needs to be identified. What situations stir frustration or excitement in you? Those reactions are often clues. They reveal what the heart has been leaning towards, sometimes without conscious permission. Scripture speaks about this kind of renewal as something that only God can initiate. In Psalm 51, David says, "Create in me a clean heart." He doesn't say, "Help me fix my problems." He asks God to do something deeper, something transformative and creative. Ezekiel echoes the same promise when he says, "I will give you a new heart." Renewal's not self repair, it's surrender to reshaping. And practically, that reshaping often happens through small, steady shifts. When we choose gratitude in specific moments instead of something vague, affection begins to soften. And when we slow down enough to be present instead of constantly productive, desire starts to recalibrate itself. When we allow ourselves to bring honest prayer to the surface instead of polished language, the heart learns it doesn't have to perform to be heard. Renewal also requires release, a release of what the heart was never meant to carry. Lingering resentment or silent comparison, or maybe a disappointment that never gets spoken. These don't just live in the mind, they settle in the heart. And while we can manage them outwardly, they quietly redirect affection inward. Naming them before God isn't weakness, it's that alignment I keep talking about. Over time, as attention shifts and burdens are surrendered, desire begins to settle back into place. What once felt forced starts to feel natural again. Compassion returns without strain. Joy shows up in small, steady ways. The heart doesn't become perfect, it becomes oriented. And orientation, more than emotion, is the sign that renewal is taking root. If the renewal of the heart begins with awareness and surrender, it's sustained through practice. Not dramatic change, practice. The heart is formed in rhythms and it's renewed in rhythms. Small, repeated attentiveness shapes affection more than the occasional intensity ever could. One simple starting point: name what currently has the strongest emotional pull in your life. Not what should matter most, but what actually does. What occupies your thoughts when you have space? What triggers your strongest reactions? Writing those down without editing them can be very eye opening. And clarity is the first kindness you offer your own heart. Another practice is specific gratitude. Instead of broad statements like, "I am thankful for my family," narrow it down. Name one moment from today that felt steady or meaningful, one conversation, one quiet win, or one simple glimpse of beauty. The heart responds more deeply to specifics than general optimism. Gratitude, when it's detailed, can retrain affection. You might also consider experimenting with replacing productivity with presence in one small area each day. Now, listen, I know we are all busy, but I want you to choose a moment. Maybe it's when you're driving, maybe it's when you're washing dishes or walking into work, and resist the urge to fill it. No podcast, even though I love that you listened to this one. Take that time. No scrolling, just awareness. Hearts that are constantly stimulated rarely have space to recalibrate. Rather than filling the space with noise, fill it with thoughts of gratitude. Fill it with the love that you have for others or something that made you feel good. Not to give you that temporary high, but to start that transformative process. Stillness isn't empty, friends. It's formative. In those times, maybe you'll consider honest prayer. Some people are petrified to pray out loud because of the words that'll come out. They're afraid of saying things that maybe people don't want to hear or that they aren't as good as the person they heard in church. But, friends, polished prayers are not what you need here. Structured prayers are not what you need here. What you need in this situation and this time is honest prayer. Tell God what feels heavy. Admit where joy has thinned out. Ask directly for renewed desire. Think back to that "create in me a clean heart" from Psalm 51. How simple and brave that is. Sometimes renewal begins with asking plainly for what we can't manufacture ourselves. So I want to challenge you this week. I want to challenge you to choose one act of quiet alignment, one small decision that reflects who you want to become, not just what you need to accomplish. Maybe it's a boundary that you need to set, even a small one. Maybe it's a conversation you need to have with somebody. Maybe it's just simply saying no. When action and affection begin to line up again, even in small ways, the heart remembers what steadiness feels like. That renewal won't arrive all at once. It will reawaken gradually through attention, honesty, surrender, and the small acts that we've talked about. And when the heart begins to reawaken, everything else, your mind, direction, your purpose, will feel less strained and more whole again. As we begin to bring this into focus, it might help to resist the urge to want to fix everything immediately. Renewal of the heart isn't a project to complete. It's not a box to check off of your to-do list, though you can start by planning certain things. Renewal of the heart is a posture to adopt. So maybe instead of asking yourself, what do I need to change? You might start with a quieter question. What has my heart been carrying? Where has affection thinned out? Where has joy felt distant? Where have you continued to show up faithfully even while something inside felt off? These aren't questions meant to expose failure. They're invitations to awareness. And awareness is the doorway to healing the heart. You might be asking yourself right now what your heart has been running towards. Maybe it's approval. Maybe it's security. Maybe it's control or comfort or achievement. None of those are unusual. They're human. But naming them gently allows you to see what has been shaping your inner direction. What we don't name quietly leads us. Final question I want to leave you with today that may be just as important as, if not more important than all the other ones. What does your heart still care about? Beneath fatigue and drift, what still matters to you? What still stirs you, even faintly? Renewal doesn't always start by removing what's wrong. Sometimes it begins by rediscovering what's still alive. This week, consider offering your heart back to God without editing it first. He doesn't want to hear the polished version, maybe not even the strong version. He wants the honest one, the tired one, the hopeful one. Scripture doesn't say God renovates perfect hearts. It says He restores willing ones. Because renewal of the heart isn't about becoming somebody new overnight. It's about allowing what has grown weary to be tended to. It's about letting affection realign with truth. And when that begins to happen, you'll notice something subtle but steady. You're not just thinking clearly or acting purposefully. You're living from a place that feels whole again. Well, friends, that is going to bring an end to this 4-part series on renewal. But we're not exactly done on the topic. If you've been tuned in, you know that my one word for 2026 is renewal. So next time we're headed into a topic that has been weighing on me very heavily. And it's kind of connected to all of this. When the heart is renewed, something else begins to surface, and that is discernment. Because once your affection is realigned, once you're no longer reacting out of fatigue or drifting out of habit, you start to see your life a little differently. The same work, the same relationships, the same opportunities with different questions. Like, am I where I'm supposed to be? Is this door closing because it's time or just because I'm tired? Is that nudge I feel a calling forward or just frustration pushing me away? That's where we're headed next time. We're going to be starting a new series called Right Place, Right Time. It's going to be about our calling, open and closed doors, and about how to discern when God is moving you, and how to tell the difference between holy discontent and just being burned out. Because not every urge to leave is a change in your calling, and not every closed door is a rejection. Sometimes renewal prepares you not just to feel differently, but to move differently. Thanks for following along our journey of renewal these past few episodes. I hope you have felt renewed through what we've shared, even in some small way. That's all for this episode of Q on Q. As always, I really do appreciate you tuning in, and we will see you back here next time, and we'll have more for you on Q.